The river wore a lid of ice so thin it rang like glass when the north wind pushed across it, and the cane fields beyond the levee whispered as if they kept their own counsel. Inside the crumbling kitchen house of Bel Amber, where soot made constellations on the rafters, a pot of black-eyed peas murmured over coals. Eulalie had salted them with the last of the fatback, stirring slow with a paddle smooth as bone. She listened the way a woman listens when every sound has a meaning: boots over gravel, laughter from the gallery, the quick dart of mice between sacks of meal. Behind her, 3 girls were shells around a single fire. Celandine, lithe and sharp as a needle, sat cross-legged on the brick floor, polishing a strip of copper until it showed her face like a distorted sun. Mabina, Mab, kept her wrists tucked to her ribs, a habit born of work done too fast for comfort. She was the one who tended flame and kept it obedient. Little Rue, not so little anymore, braided twine with lampwick, her fingers sure, her eyes on the threshold. Eulalie did not turn when she spoke because with daughters you learn to hold the thread and watch the loom at once. "Rue, how many lengths?" "7, Rue said, and her teeth flashed in the hearthlight. 8 if I steal from the laundry rope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." Celandine's copper caught the fire and returned it in a blade of light. "Mama, you sure?" Sure was a word for people with choices. Eulalie tasted the steam from the pot and thought of the calendar the overseer kept nailed to the smokehouse door, 31 days marked in a square that ended tonight. The white folks called it watch night. On the big house gallery, the planter's family would sing away the old year and call blessings toward the new. They would not think how some years were not yours to bless. "Not sure," Eulalie said. "Ready." Readiness had a shape. It was the shape of a place where smoke knew where to go, where wood was cut and stacked in cords, where little jars slept in a row under the sill. Readiness was a list memorized in the bones. Eulalie could have named the names with her eyes shut: Madame Clemence with her ivory fan and soft shoes that never touched the yard mud, Mr. Thaddeus, the son home from school with his Latin and his new tobacco pipe, Overseer Gorse with his rope coiled like a snake around his belt. Some names you did not say because saying brought them close. The kettle hissed. Outside, a bell rang once, twice, then again in a rhythm older than bells. It meant harness the mules. It meant light the lanterns in the carriage house. It meant the master and his guests would ride to the chapel of Saint Etienne for Mass, and the yard would be theirs for 2 hours and the river wind besides. Mab's eyes lifted. Now, Eulalie said, and set the paddle aside. They crossed the yard with their heads bent like any errands, apron corners pinned between fingers, work passing unnoticed because work defined them. Eulalie felt the January cold bite her cheeks and welcomed it, because cold wakes you. The big house, with its peeling paint and elegant rot, stood pale as a bone. Smoke laid a hand on the sky. She smelled cane trash, lard, the faint high smell of whiskey. Rue ducked into the laundry to fetch the extra line and came out with damp knuckles and a grin that said she'd found more than she was sent for, a tin of lice so perfect for greasing hinges, and a stray brass key that had lost its tag. Eulalie tucked both into her bodice without comment. On a night like this, Providence hid itself in small affordances. When the carriage wheeled away with its cluster of voices and the gate clanged behind it, silence came down like a second dusk. The only men remaining were old or sot. Gorse, thank God, had gone ahead to slap at the field hands dragged to the chapel for show. Eulalie looked at her girls and found what she expected in their faces: Celandine already at the map in her skull, Mab listening to the language of flame, Rue bright with a dare she had inherited from no one and everyone. "Say it back to me," Eulalie said. Celandine spoke first, her words exact. "Pantry door first. Oil the hinge, Rue. I go to the cellar, take the lamp from the second stair, not the third, so they won't notice it gone. I bring the copper pan." "Which copper pan?" Eulalie said. "The fluted one that catches the grease when the spit turns. Because it already has fat and ash in it and looks innocent." Eulalie nodded. "Mab." "Damp cloths over noses," Mab said, quick, almost a whisper. "Check under the nursery door for draft." If it pulls strong, we wait. If it is still, we lift the latch with the spoon handle and take out the wet kindling, leave only dry. Fire climbs better that way. We set it low and slow, make the beam talk, not scream. Then to the parlor curtains, back corners, where the fringe is thick. Then upstairs corridor, outside mistress's wardrobe room. Leave the path by the staircase clean, so it draws. And you, Rue? Rue swallowed once, and Eulalie saw her think all the way down. I go to the coach house. I pinch the corks from 2 lamps and soak the wicks in the turpentine barrel. I set them in the eaves of the gallery, left and right, so when the draft pulls, the flames meet in the middle. She glanced up. We do not lock doors. We do not shout. We walk. Good, Eulalie said, a word that hurt and healed in one motion. If it goes ill? We run to the levee path, Celandine said. We keep to the cane stubble where it crunches underfoot and masks us. We make for the cypress, the one split by lightning, and we wait on the far side until dawn. And if it goes well? Eulalie asked, soft as breath. Same, Mab said. We wait. We don't look back. The kitchen door yielded to the lye soap. They moved like they had learned to move here, present but invisible, the way steam moves in a room that has known it long. In the pantry, rosemary hung brittle on twine, hemhocks sweated salt on their hooks. Eulalie felt the house the way a seamstress feels cloth, a weave, a give, a set of seams. She knew the sash windows that stuck, the boards that groaned, the flaw in the stair where a nail had shone. Celandine ghosted ahead to the cellar stairs and plucked the second lamp as if there were music and she knew her part. Mab knelt at the nursery threshold, slid the spoon handle under, lifted like a lockpicker in a story, then withdrew the damp splints and laid them beside the wall where no eye would gather them into meaning. Rue vanished toward the coach house with a length of wick coiled in her palm like a living thing. Eulalie herself went to the dining room, where the long table waited under its white cloth like a patient under anesthesia. She set the fluted copper pan beneath the chandelier and tilted. A single drop of lamp oil fell into the fat and made a new smell, sweet, dangerous. She did not light it. Not yet. Timing was gospel tonight. The house breathed around them, timbers settling, fire gums ticking in the stove, winter itself flexing a hand against the shutters. Eulalie remembered every meal she had dragged out of these rooms, the way Madame Clement's mouth pinched when the roux was too blonde, the way Gorse laughed with his teeth when a plate chipped. Remembering did not slow her. Memory, she had taught her daughters, is a blade you keep honed but sheathed until the hour sits down across from you and demands to eat. Boot heels. A voice. Eulalie's heart rose into her throat and then gently sank back where it belonged. Not the planter. Not his son. The voice belonged to Mr. Desrosiers, the clerk from the sugar house. He had stayed behind to tally. His steps were careful, his lungs humming a tune like a carpenter's saw. Celandine flowed back to Eulalie's shoulder, fingers speaking. 1. Man tall. Not drunk. The little sign language the quarters had invented was nest of birds in Eulalie's hands. She made a motion back. Spoons. Delay. Mab drifted to the parlor and stood with a duster like any girl told to tidy before company. She let Desrosiers pass her twice without his eyes catching her whole. Rue, oh sweet clever Rue, appeared in the doorway with a folded cloth over a bottle. "Maman send this for your cough," she told him, making her voice small and clean. "My cough?" Desrosiers laughed and opened his mouth to protest, but Rue pressed the cloth to his fingers. He took it because men took what they were offered if the hand was humble enough. The opium tincture inside was not enough to fell him. Eulalie had no wish to kill a man who kept his hands to himself, but it would turn the edges of the world soft and make him go where he was told. "Sit by the stove," Mab suggested, all politeness. "It will ease your chest." He went. Eulalie watched his head bend and thought of 100 quiet countermoves that make a life survivable, who to feign towards and who to feed, who to turn away with a look anyone else would miss. He drowsed. He did not wake when the first hinge sang. They worked. They did not speak. Fire begins where air is greedy. Mab nursed the nursery ember until it took the dry kindling and laid its delicate mouth along the lowest beam. Rue sat cross-legged beneath the gallery eaves, soaking and setting the two lamp wicks where the draft would draw them toward one another like long-lost kin. Celandine carried the copper pan like a priestess with a relic, positioned it beneath the chandelier, and left it hungry. Midnight crept closer. In the far fields, where the cane cut to stubble looked like a bad haircut on God's head, men with numb hands and women with harder eyes trudged back from the chapel. Eulalie felt their return in her skin. She looked once toward the road. Lanterns bobbed like the eyes of things that belonged to water. She turned back to the work at hand. "Now," she said, and the word went out like a bird. Rue touched a match. The wick hissed, flared, and then settled into a steady tongue. Across the gallery, its twin answered. Heat rose like prayer. In the nursery, Mab opened the stove belly and offered it a twist of paper printed with a shipping manifest for the year's molasses, names of barrels, weight, destination. The edge kindled, the letters shrank into cinders, and the draft pulled the fire onto the beam with a sigh like someone relieved of an old ache. Celandine lifted the lamp to the chandelier and fed it a whisper of flame. The copper pan below caught the first drip of melting tallow and answered without smoke. Fire is a language. Speak it wrong, it screams and brings neighbors. Speak it right, it whispers across rafters, along curtains, through hollow core of doors. Eulalie had learned its syntax in the kitchen, not with malice but as any cook learns heat. Tonight she conjugated it spotless. Desrosiers stirred and blinked at the room as if it were farther away than usual. Is it more warm? Chimney's drawing high, Eulalie said. Her voice wore the neutral dress she put on for white ears. You rest. Upstairs, the wardrobe room exhaled camphor and violets. Fabrics whisper the way fields do. Mab's hands shook once when she set the smallest flame beneath the fringe of a shawl, then steadied. She would not forget the feel of that shake, and neither would Eulalie. Courage is not absence but arrangement. You place fear where it will be useful and do not let it wander. The first crack sounded like ice breaking on the river. The second sounded like a jaw opening too wide. Eulalie felt a thrill she had not invited move through her body and then leave. Jubilation would be a luxury. She checked the corridor for draft and found the pull strong toward the staircase. Good. She wetted a cloth and tied it across her mouth and nose. Girls, she breathed, and 3 heads lifted from 3 flames. They made a single procession down the back steps, 3 shadows and the woman who had made them, passing the pantry where the copper pan now hummed like a beehive. At the kitchen, Eulalie took up the pot of black-eyed peas and set it at the threshold like an offering. Let anyone who came smelling smoke find comfort and confusion in the same breath. Outside, the stars felt close enough to practice mercy. The gallery wood above them purred, the 2 lamp flames had found each other and were married now, consuming oil with quick unashamed kisses. Somewhere in the big house, a mantel mirror cracked and then unscrolled itself into silvery shards like a shedding snake. Eulalie looked toward the road again and saw lanterns, more of them, swinging nearer. Voices poured down the lane. The family and their guests were returning early, watch night cut short by cold or boredom. Celandine, Eulalie said, already calculating with a cook's mind that counts portions and guests together. Window bars. Celandine nodded and vanished around the kitchen L. Rue's mouth tilted at one corner. We wanted to watch, she said, and Eulalie nearly laughed at the child that remained in that sentence. You will watch the river, Eulalie said. You will listen for my step. The first carriage rattled over the yard stones and the horses snorted in surprise at the warm air that met them, a soft dry heat carrying violets and smoke. Madame Clement's voice rose like a blade. Thaddeus. Where is Gorse? What is this? She mounted the gallery step and stopped dead under the eaves where fire curled like an ornament she did not remember commissioning. Thaddeus ran for the side door with a brave idiot's eagerness. He flung it open and the house exhaled smoke into his teeth. He coughed, turned, and shouted for water. Men in coats ran toward the pump, sloshed buckets, cursed their hands. Water fought well but fire spoke better that night, and every language needs time to argue. Eulalie, at the shadow of the cistern, waited. The gallery roof carried the flame past her like a train. She thought of the countless trains of plates she had carried, heavy with food paid for by the stolen labor of her days. Balance, she thought, and it was not vengeance in her so much as an arithmetic that finally learned its sum. Celandine slipped back with the small pry bar they used for crate lids. Bars set, she whispered. Windows open an inch so the fire gets greedy, then stuck. Good girl, Eulalie said, and let her hand graze her daughter's knuckles. Brief, small, but the electricity of it lit parts of her that the fire could not reach. Inside, someone screamed and someone prayed at the exact same pitch. A man, Mr. Desrosiers, groggy and good, bless him, stumbled to the yard with his coat over his face and gasped clean air like a man born twice. Eulalie's heart nicked toward relief, then she put the knife away. She did not have enough heart to spend on exceptions, not tonight. Flames lit the parlor curtains whole. The nursery beam that had been coaxed quiet until now gave up its composure and roared. Sound rose and rolled down the staircase like a beast finding its throat. Heat leaned into the gallery and slapped the air so hard the lantern glass sang. Men at the pump formed a line and passed buckets in frantic cadence, water splashing, feet slipping. Clemence, her fan stupidly poised at her throat, cried for someone to save the portraits. Mab's eyes watered behind the damp cloth. She watched the pattern the smoke wrote, low at first, then higher, now scudding toward the roofline, and she knew it as surely as she knew the difference between simmer and scorch. She tugged Eulalie's sleeve. We go? Soon, Eulalie said. Her tone was a spoon testing the bottom of a pot, attentive to the stick. The roof gave a little, embers leapt like the night flicked them from its fingernails. The second carriage pulled in and stopped short, trapped by the first and the men thrashing in the yard. Thaddeus had climbed onto the gallery railing with a bucket like King Canute ordering back the tide. He doused a swath of flame and it vanished and then reappeared 6 inches farther along, mischievous and patient. He shouted a word that was half mother and half God. Rue, Eulalie said. Go. Rue held for a heartbeat, defiance a pet bird she wanted to keep. Then she swallowed it and ran, her braids skipping the rhythm of her breath. She vanished along the levee path, feet silent in the cane stubble, heading for the split cypress where dawn would know her name. Celandine, Eulalie said without looking, stay with Mab. Stay in my air. Celandine grunted her assent. Mab slid her hand into her mother's for one beat of a heart and then took it back as if the electricity had burned her. A window blew. Glass became stars and then regret on the stones. The house shouted down its own history one rafter at a time. Eulalie did not think of punishment because the world had taught her that punishment came regardless of what you did. She thought of placement, of herself, of her girls, of the night around them. She imagined the path to the river a thread, and laced her steps upon it in her mind so that when it was time, her feet would only have to follow. A shriek sharpened the air. Not Madame Clemence. Younger. Finer. Eulalie closed her eyes once, opened them, found the part of herself that could be merciless and still be human. Mr. Thaddeus's wife, Delphine, pale and newly arrived from Mobile, had separated from the group. She stood at an upstairs window, throwing her weight against bars that had never held anyone important. Her hair had come down in sheets. For one lunatic instant she looked like the Madonna in the chapel fresco, crowned in smoke. Mab's hand found Eulalie's sleeve. Mama. We have no keys, Eulalie said. And our breath belongs to us. It cost her to say it. Cost her twice to hold to it. She had scrubbed the blood of these people's butchered hogs from her own nails every winter of her life and they had never learned the smell of her children's hair. Arithmetic again. Thaddeus vanished into the smoke and reappeared dragging a blanket that burped flame at every edge. He wrapped it around himself and shouldered into the doorway, brave the way fools can be when the world has never punished them properly. Eulalie felt the heat rip at her. Above them, the gallery eaves yawned and then exhaled a single wide board that came down in a wheel of sparks. It missed Thaddeus by no more than a saint's eyelash and struck the railing. Men shouted and surged, and Eulalie used their movement like a cloak. She stepped backward, 3 steps, 5, and her daughters stepped with her, 3 shadows that had rehearsed being unseen. Across the yard, the cane fields made a sound like silk torn against teeth. Beyond that, the river rang its thin glass note again as wind shouldered ice into ice. The world felt held between inhale and exhale. Eulalie put her palm in the small of Celandine's back and pressed. They slipped into the slim dark seam between kitchenelle and smokehouse and then out into the cane stubble where cold cut from the ankles up. At the gate, a rider appeared, a late guest or a neighbor with a nose for other people's trouble. He reined in, stared, and then wheeled his horse as if the night had opened an eye under his stirrup. Eulalie caught a glimpse of his face, Overseer Gorse, back from the chapel earlier than she'd counted. His hat was in his hand. His rope coiled and lived at his hip. "Run," Eulalie said, but she did not run. She turned. She drew herself up until she felt as tall as the doorway she had been born to pass through sideways. Gorse's horse danced at the stink of smoke. He saw the women then, the cook he had ordered and scolded, the daughters he had not learned the names of because he preferred to think of children as chores, and he knew. Men like him recognize weather. He knew when he smiled with all his teeth as if a dog had finally given him the fight he had been kicking it for. He put his hand to the rope. Mab moved first. Quick, a spark given legs. She flung the lye-greased rag she had saved all evening. It hit Gorse's wrist and the horse startled sideways and the rope dropped to the ground like something ashamed of what it was about to do. Celandine was already there, heel grinding the loop into the mud, foot pinning the snake's head. Eulalie heard herself make a sound that was not a word, all the syllables of a lifetime crowded at once. "Back," Eulalie said, but she did not mean retreat. She meant, into yourselves. Into the plan. Into the space the fire has given us. They edged along the cane and Gorse, cursing, dismounted to gather his rope and his dignity. He came toward them with the strange careful slowness of a man who knows a thing is hot but not how hot until his hand is inside it. The big house gave a cry of its own then, a deep-bellied groan, and a section of roof folded down. Heat belched. Gorse flinched and in that nick of an instant Eulalie pulled her daughters by their wrists into the cane stubble cleft. They stumbled, they recovered, they ran. Stars. Ice. The split cypress ahead like a listening ear. Behind them, men shouted directions, women wailed names, the river sang glass. Eulalie did not look back because her neck belonged to her and she had decided how it would turn in this life. She counted steps instead, small numbers you keep in your mouth so fear cannot borrow them. They reached the cypress. Rue sprang from the far side and smacked into her mother's chest and Eulalie held her once, brief, hard, and then loosed her. They crouched in the tree's lee while sparks floated past like dumb bright insects. From here the house looked smaller than it had any right to be, like a toy burning on a child's slate. Cold, Rue whispered, but it was not complaint. It was agreement with the night. Breathe through it, Eulalie said. She watched for Gorse. For a long minute he did not appear. When he did, he was on horseback again, circling the yard, looking for the right piece of darkness that would add up to their absence. He turned his head. He turned it again. The rope hung from his hand like the tail of a creature he had not come to question. Will he see? Mab breathed. Eulalie considered the world as if it were a board and her were a player who had been told all her life she was a piece. The fire she had spoken so carefully now spoke without her and that was correct. The wind had turned a quarter point and was pushing smoke toward the river. Smoke is kindness when it wants to be. It covered, it carried. He will smell the cane, Eulalie said. He will think of rats. He will think of men he can punish tomorrow. He will go where power lives, where there are eyes to watch him hold a bucket. Gorse wheeled his horse and galloped toward the mass of men. He vanished into their shouting. Time did its slow miracle where it tucks an hour inside a minute and lets both be true. The roof broke open and the gallery furniture made a hoarse hissing when it learned the taste of flame. The portraits bubbled like faces in a nightmare. The river kept its cold note. Celandine leaned her head back against the cypress and did something Eulalie had not expected. She laughed. It trembled and then steadied the way a hand does when it has held a knife too long and finally sets it down. "We did it," she said, wonder, not triumph. Eulalie did not answer because the night moved again, not wind, not flame. Something else. From the road beyond the gate, a lantern swung, then another, then three. Voices lower than the planter's guests, more purposeful. Militia? Neighbors? Men who had fought in wars and missed them since. The kind who see fire and think of chances. Mab pinched Eulalie's sleeve. "Mama." "Yes," Eulalie said, her mouth dry. New arithmetic. She measured the path from their tree to the levee cut that would take them down to the little skiff she had hidden under cane mats in the fall. She could feel the weight of Rue at the prow, the push of Celandine's arm, the quick smart of Mab's hands on the oarlocks. She could feel it because she had thought it so long the thought had made a groove and things like to follow grooves. A man's voice pealed out from the new arrivals, carrying authority like an unlit torch. "Hold there! Bring sand. You, Gorse, your rope." They had seen Gorse. They had not seen the women. For a breath, Eulalie thought they would begin their run then and there, but the night had one more move. From the second carriage, small and late and miserable, a child crawled, 2 years old perhaps, hair like wheat, face smeared with soot and tears. He toddled toward the pump where the men had thrown down a shawl in haste, drawn by color or comfort or simply the only soft thing left in the yard. Rue's breath made a sound like someone set a cup too hard on a table. Eulalie felt the decision rise from under her ribs, already fully formed because it had been waiting there all her life. She put her hand on Rue's shoulder and squeezed until the girl's bones told her they understood. "Stay," Eulalie whispered. To Celandine she said, "Count to 60 by threes. If I am not back, you go to the boat." Mab shook her head violently, "No," but the fire chose that moment to hurl a timber across the yard and men cried out and the distraction became a door. Eulalie slipped through it and down into the cane as if she were made of the same thin chatter as the stalks. Her body knew the yard the way a tongue knows a broken tooth. She came up at the pump, near enough that she could smell boiled linen and smoke and the dregs of whiskey in someone's lap. The child looked at her. His eyes were impossibly blue, ridiculous in this world of soot. "Hush," Eulalie said, and for all the languages she had learned in kitchens and fields and chapels, this was the one she knew best. She scooped him, pressed his face against her shoulder where the cloth was damp and would filter smoke, and turned. Gorse saw. He moved with the terrible economy of a man whose living has taught him when to conserve and when to pounce. Rope in his hand. Horse under him. Eulalie ran. Not fast, because fast makes noise. Not slow, because slow makes death. She picked a line through men in buckets and flame as if she were crossing the kitchen on a feast day, and the men did not see her the way they did not see the hands that fed them. Then Gorse shouted and the word hung the way a bell does right before it lands. "Stop!" The child in her arms made a hiccuping sob. Eulalie did not stop. She reached the L, the smokehouse shadow, the place where her daughters had already folded into night. The river's glass note sang like it had learned her name. Behind her, hooves struck sparks from stone. Rope unfurled. She could hear its hiss as if it were a snake invited back to Eden. She slid into the cane. The rope whispered past her ear and bit the trunk of a young cypress and kissed itself shut with a wicked satisfaction. Gorse cursed and hauled. Eulalie went to ground, rolled once, shielded the child with her body, came up crouched, and then the cane parted and Mab's hand closed over her wrist like a promise. "Boat," Celandine breathed from the dark. "Now." They ran the last yards bent double, the child a weight Eulalie would carry into any hell that wanted to try her. The levee slope gave underfoot and then steadied. The skiff crouched in its hide like a fox with its nose under its tail. Rue kicked free the mats and jumped to the bow. Celandine shoved. Mab fetched the oars and set them without words. Behind them, Gorse forced his horse into the cane, wincing as blades slashed his mount's knees. Men shouted at him to come back. He laughed, short, savage, and pressed on. He had a hunter's glow on him. He had a story already telling itself about how he had gone into flame and reeds and brought back what the world said he owned. The skiff slid like a letter into a slot. Water took their weight with a cold that felt like judgment and benediction at once. Eulalie crouched in the stern with the child clamped to her chest. Mab pulled. Celandine pulled. Rue kept the nose true. The river's skin cracked and then sealed behind them in a music that sounded like everything breaking and being mended in the same instant. On the bank, Gorse burst out of the cane and saw them. He wheeled his horse as if he could ride the water itself. He flung the rope. It fell short with a plop that set rings moving toward the boat, gentle as a child's hand. He cursed with ingenuity. He put 2 fingers to his mouth and loosed a whistle that had always made men come running. Across the water, in the black seam where river became sky, a shape moved, another boat, lower, longer, paddled with an old rhythm. Eulalie's eyes narrowed. She knew that silhouette. The free men who kept to the swamp and the islands, who traded catskins and news, who came sometimes in the blue hours for sacks of meal and left fish at the kitchen door when the moon was new. A lantern hooded twice then opened once. A sign. A welcome. Or a bargain. Or both. Hold to our line, a voice called, low and carrying. If you want your dawn. Eulalie looked at her daughters. Their eyes were bright as coals caught at the edge of a log. The child in her arms had gone very still the way small creatures do when a hawk's shadow crosses. On the bank, Gorse gathered himself for one last try, rope whistling, horse trembling, the night itself pulling tight like a drum. They could turn toward the swamp boat and its hooded light, into a darkness that might be sanctuary or snare. Or they could keep for the far shore where the cypress knees made a jagged alphabet and hope the militia kept to fire and shouting and stories, not to water. Eulalie set her hand on the tiller. The river held its breath. The skiff's nose began to swing. And from the burning gallery behind them, clear, impossible, like a bell struck inside a locked trunk, came a voice calling Eulalie's name. Not Gorse. Not the planter. A woman's voice. A voice Eulalie had not heard in 14 years, since the auction block at Opelousas had unthreaded her days from the person she loved like a seam ripped with a single cruel pull. Eulalie. Her hand stopped. The boat drifted on its own will for one heartbeat, 2. Fire licked the sky into violent lace. Gorse's rope hauled in behind them like a snake learning to swim. The swamp boat's lantern winked once, twice, patient and merciless as time. Eulalie turned her head toward that impossible voice and the sight that came with it, and in the instant her eyes learned what they were seeing. The oar in Mab's hand slipped, struck the gunwale, and the skiff skated sideways into the one strip of current that neither bank nor swamp boat commanded. The river took them. And from the shore, Gorse laughed once, a sound like a door locking from the outside, as he lifted his rope for one final throw, the loop wide and certain, the knot a dark mouth opening toward everything she refused to surrender. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Surrender. Not a word Eulalie had ever permitted her mind to wear, but the rope made it into a shape in the dark, and Gorse's arm gave that shape the weight of a thrown sentence. The loop flew. The skiff slid sideways as the current rode them harder than their 2 oars could answer. Mab's knuckles went white. Celandine dug her blade of a jaw into the air like she could bite wind. Rue held the bow straight, eyes enormous, braid dripping river. Eulalie felt the air move around her ear as the rope passed, a breath that would have been a bruise if God blinked slower. It struck the water, sucked cold, and sank. Gorse swore and wheeled his horse along the bank, following. The burning house framed him in orange, a hunter painted in firelight on the edge of a world beginning to unmake itself. Pull, Eulalie said, not loud, the way a cook gives an instruction that must be obeyed without spilling. The child, sleeping like terror sleeps, stiff and quiet, shifted against her shoulder and sighed. Who called you? Mab rasped between strokes, her damp cloth hanging at her throat now, lungs needing naked air. A ghost who still has lungs, Eulalie said, eyes fixed on the swamp boat where the hooded lantern blinked its patient syllables. Come, come, decide, decide. She could feel the old code of the Maroon Islands lifting like fog across her thoughts. Help was always a bargain. Safety was always a loan. From the burning gallery, the voice called again. Closer this time, impossibly. Eulalie. Celandine twisted to look, and the oar bit wrong and the skiff yawed. Eulalie caught the gunwale with her free hand and shoved her weight to keep them from rolling. Face forward, she snapped. Eyes on the cut. But her own trader's eyes swung toward the ruin of the big house, and across the river of fire she saw it. The attic dormer, Madame's secret upper room where she stored winter silks and gilt, had thrown open its small mouth to shout. The iron lattice that had always seemed decorative now held a human body. The woman behind it was smoke-pale and ash-haired from the heat, but her eyes were the color of molasses just taken to the boil, and they knew Eulalie as if all the years between had been minutes excused from a table. Zéphine, Eulalie said, and the name climbed out of her like a long, bright thorn at last removed. Her sister's lips shaped a cry Eulalie could not hear over flame. Then Zéphine tore a strip of curtain and wrapped her hands and caught the iron and shook the lattice until the night made a sound like I am losing faith. The iron held. The fire took the curtains before Zéphine could tear a second strip. Smoke poured like judgment. Row! Eulalie said, because time is a god that answers to nothing but itself. Celandine and Mab put their backs into it until the skiff's ribs groaned. The swamp boat slid closer, its prow a knife that cut a slower water, the paddlers long and low and quiet as herons. Hold to our line, came that same voice, even steadier as panic peeled behind them. The channel will spit you in circles unless you take our wake. Rue didn't wait for Eulalie's permission, she eyed like a little sailor and snapped the bow into the groove the swamp boat left behind. The skiff steadied. The current stopped trying to turn them into their own reflections. Gorse's rope whistled again and this time only kissed the eddy they had traveled a heartbeat before. Zéphine, Eulalie whispered again, as if a second speaking made a bridge. She twisted. The dormer was a mouth full of black now. No figure. No eyes. No voice. The house had swallowed the word back into itself the way it had swallowed 17,000 meals of hers and 3 pregnancies and one whole song she had never learned to finish. Ma, Rue said. I know, Eulalie said, and meant nothing and everything. Her hand, finally her own after a life of cooking for other people's mouths, wrenched the tiller and held hard to the maroon boat's wake. The swamp took them the way old trees take birds, as if they had always belonged. Water wrote slow around knees of cypress, around the hidden backs of alligators that did not bother to look like anything but what they were. Spanish moss leaned down from branches like grandmothers offering hair and stories. The hooded lantern made a small, obedient half-moon on the black water. Behind it, men paddled with shoulders that had never learned to waste motion. They were not alone in the skiff. A child, blue-eyed, flax-haired, now breathed the same smoke-salted air as Eulalie's daughters. His sobs had dwindled to a regular small sound that said, "For now, I live." He clutched at Eulalie's dress with a hand sticky with sugar or fear. "Whose is he?" Celandine asked, because naming is a kind of mercy and a kind of weapon both. "Mine," Eulalie said, and it surprised her how the truth of it felt. "Tonight." The swamp boat pitched its lantern once more and then hooded it, and darkness fell with a weight so soft it felt like a quilt. A voice came back to them the way voices do in places where water makes roads. "We will take you to the island," it said. "But listen, if you bring heat, we will push you back into the channel and let the river teach you. If you bring quiet, we will wrap you in it." "We know quiet," Mab said, and Eulalie heard the double meaning. We know the quiet of being silenced, and we know the quiet of slipping past a burning world. The boatmen made a sound that might have been agreement. They turned their paddles to a new cadence, one that sounded like a man remembering the heartbeat of someone he loved. The water changed, grew thicker, slicker, the skiff followed in the wake as if it had learned now the grammar of obedience to the right thing. Gorse and the militia were not ghosts. They were men with lungs and fury and horses that could not learn to walk on water. They trailed along the bank until the bank hived and broke into islands and the islands braided, and a living man on a living horse cannot chisel sense out of that kind of geography in the dark. Gorse shouted until his voice went hoarse and the only answer was frogs. He stayed longer than sense advised and then rowed toward the ferry landing to find a skiff. Hunger will make a man clever. Pride will make him late. The maroon island lifted itself out of the black. It was not large, a man could walk its length in a minute if he was not careful where he set his feet. Cypresses made a cathedral of the night. Somewhere in the dark, tiny fires sighed into themselves and then out again, the way lungs do when someone tells the truth and someone hears it. Hands took the skiff's gunwales. A woman leaned into Eulalie's patch of night, her face a geography Eulalie had not expected to travel tonight, high cheekbones where hunger had done its etching, eyes watchful without being cruel, hair wrapped in a cloth that had once been red and now was the color of memory. "Come," she said. It wasn't quite a command. It was an acknowledgement that they had arrived and must justify the fact. Eulalie lifted the child first and set him into the woman's arms. He whimpered, then burrowed into the unfamiliar hollow as if it had been made for him. Eulalie climbed out, knees threatening to forget what ground felt like. Mab and Celandine followed, pasting their feet to the little planks laid over mud the way you paste foil onto a tart so it won't burn. "Who calls this place?" Eulalie asked, because names matter, and the swamp respects nothing but names and the things that eat them. "St. Malo," the woman said, and smiled at Eulalie's flinch. "Not that St. Malo. Our own. We keep our saints like we keep our bread, different recipe, same hunger. I am Tantilorine." "I am Eulalie," Eulalie said, "because you must give and take at the same time to survive." Tantilorine blew out a little breath like a match. "We know the name. The cook. The one who keeps a ledger in her head and pays debts by midnight." Eulalie resisted the impulse to look over her own shoulder to see who else wore her skin. She nodded once. "And these are my girls. Celandine, Mabina, and Rue." "Your work has already altered the air," Tantilorine said, tilting her head to where the eastern edge of the sky burned a slow, ugly orange. "What we smell tonight will not blow away by morning. You will draw searchers for 3 days, then 7 more, then the story will keep looking after they go home." She touched the flax-haired child's head with a palm as sure as a blessing. "And you bring a white mouth with you. That brings bread and knives both." "He came from the carriage," Eulalie said. "He came because the yard made him choose and he chose the only soft thing left." The woman considered the child as if he were a bundle of rope that could be used to hang you or to pull you from a ditch. "We can hide what color does to a face if a face learns to be quiet," she decided. "For a day. For 2. After that, we must send him somewhere that claims his name aloud." "His name," Rue echoed, as if she were standing at a well and had never in her life trusted what it said when she shouted into it. The boy woke as if he had been listening the whole time and only now chose to open his eyes. He did not cry. He looked at Eulalie and then at Tantilorine and then at the ribbon of flame far off like a warning wrapped around a present. "Lex," he said, as if he had been asked from his first breath every morning. "Alexander Thad," he hiccuped and chewed the rest. "Lex," Eulalie said, and felt the significance of a white child naming himself around her daughters like a candle set near paper. They led the skiff into the cradle under the mangroves where boats slept. Eulalie's legs quivered from the rowing in the day that had been a year. Under the trees, other people stepped out of shadow as shadows shrug off shoulders, a man with a scar that ran his face like a map line, a girl with a swollen belly and a machete that had learned what pig, vine, and man all felt like when they fell, an old woman whose laugh had lost none of its teeth. They did not reach for Eulalie's daughters. They did not reach to touch the head of the white child accidentally kidnapped by justice. They kept a distance that was not insult but housekeeping. "What will you do?" the scarred man asked. His voice was a low country drawl dragged through French and left to dry. "Bel Amber will bring dogs and men who don't mind losing skin to find their pride. You want to lay up and let it pass, or you want to turn and finish what a good night started?" "Finish?" Mab said. The word had so many edges it could cut its speaker in the air it traveled. Scarface shrugged, a lazy elegance. Men like Gorse will make a lesson out of you if they can. Best to make a school before he builds his class. There's boats could be cut. Coops could be opened. Dogs that could learn mistakes. Ledger books that might swim. Eulalie understood him, and the understanding made a new ache settle along the ridge of her ribs. Revenge is arithmetic, yes, but it is also appetite. She had emptied one plate tonight. The hunger would ask for seconds. She forced her own mouth around the words that would feed and not starve tomorrow. My plan is simple, she said. Hide, breathe, carry our own back if she still breathes. Her throat closed on Zephine's name and then opened again, stubborn, and pass the child to hands that can deliver him to the one white mouth in this parish that tells truth when it counts. Who? Celandine asked, not to doubt but to know where to point her eyes when the time came. Father Isaac at Saint Etienne, Eulalie said. He hears what he isn't supposed to. He knows what it costs to say it out loud. Tantilorine's eyebrow made a small cathedral arch. The priest, she said, tasting the idea like soup. We used to steal eggs from his chicken yard when I was no taller than the talk in my own house. He would find the nest empty and leave corn closer next time. She considered Lex, the white child whose breath fogged in this island's dark. He will do what Mercy tells him if no one sees him do it. And my sister, Eulalie said, the words new and raw and ladled carefully. Zephine. If the house did not eat her, if the lattice can be unseated once the men who love that house stop choking on their own smoke, I will walk on the road with God's name or the devil's to fetch her. Silence accepted that pledge. It did not bless or scold it. Tantilorine nodded once to the scarred man. Wake Renee's boys, she said. The ones who can make a coil of wire look like a serpent to a dog. To the old woman, heat broth. Not too much spice. Their bellies have been eating coal. To Eulalie, you can sleep here for an hour, cook. Then you will be called. An hour, Eulalie agreed, and lay down without asking where. Tantilorine spread a reed mat for the girls. They folded onto it the way birds fold their necks into their feathers. Lex pressed himself into Eulalie's warmth as if the world had measured him and found he fit here better than where he'd been cut from. Eulalie did not ask permission of her heart to accept that. She slept the kind of sleep that knows it must earn itself again 3 times before dawn. Asterisk. They woke to a different night. The east had stopped burning, the smoke had laid down to do its other work. The swamp's black had turned to a velvet brown that carried distances into itself without losing their shapes. Tantilorine shook Eulalie's shoulder with a familiarity earned in an hour by women who decide to keep one another alive. Up, she said. Renee's boys have a path. The priest sleeps in his chair. And the shore god forgot to finish has a handful of men who think they were born to correct him. Mab's hand went instantly to the oars that weren't there. Celandine's went to the pry bar. Ruse to the boy. Lex blinked and then hid his face in Rue's side without hesitation. For a small and important fraction of time, he and Rue needed nothing from the world but that lane. 2 boats, Renee said. The scarred man had a name now and it fit better, one for the priest in the package, one for whatever soul the house did not finish eating. We'll leave a tangle on the ferry ropes at Fondue Chain. If Gorse takes to water, he'll spend 20 good minutes talking to an argument he can't win. If he cuts the line, the ferry will drift and men with pistols will swear at one another with the energy God intended for penance. Dogs? Celandine said. Renee grinned, and in the grin he lost 10 of his 40 years. Dogs will learn the story of a raccoon that has too many legs, he said enigmatically. Renee's boys are generous with stories. Tantilorine pressed a warm, dented cup into Eulalie's hand. Drink. You'll need to argue with someone big soon, and it is better to do that with soup on your tongue than ashes. Eulalie drank. It tasted like bones given a second life, and a third. She swallowed everything it said. They went by water again, but now the swamp boat led them through a different sentence, shorter words, harder consonants. The channel lay low and then shouldered up into the river, which rolled them with a familiarity that felt almost like anger. Eulalie let the skiff rock and did not fight it. She could feel Bel Amber before she saw it. A place you have fed recognizes your weight on any road. The big house was an abattoir of memory. The roof had collapsed inward like a prayer whose hands had slipped. Men in shirt sleeves moved through the wreckage with the slow, bullied dignity of people who do not understand they are digging their own past out of a pit that will not stop widening. Every board wore water. Every window wore smoke. The porch had not fallen, it had canted, stubborn, and stood like a drunk vowing to change. Gorse was there. Of course. He stood on the edge of the porch, boot heel on a black char, rope coiled like a pet that learned nothing from yesterday. He watched the river as if it owed him a body on a string. He did not see the two shadowed boats slip along the far bank, then under the lip of the collapsed levee where the flood years ago had dug a cave into earth and left it for men like René to make useful. The priest was nearer than the house. St. Etienne's chapel sat white against the few trees the wind liked. It had watched the fire all night and had not left its post. Buildings that keep vows don't start breaking them just because neighboring oaths burn to grease. Eulalie had never loved the chapel. Churches have a way of eating the truth of women who spend their days warming other people's dinners. But Father Isaac had a way of letting his building be less strict than his God demanded. They knocked on the sacristy door like beggars who knew the kitchen hours. The door opened before they finished the second knock. Father Isaac stood there, cassock creased, hair shocked into white storms, eyes red as though smoke had argued with them all night. When he saw Eulalie he didn't say child, and that was the first mercy. He saw Lex and didn't say Jesus, and that was the second. You have no appointments at this hour, he said mildly, opening the door wider. But I am very good at pretending the schedule says different things. Take him, Eulalie said, and pushed Lex toward kindness. Hide him in your sacristy, tell him about God, about Job if you must, but better about Ruth and Naomi who knew how to stay. And then send him on the bread wagon with Marcel when the sun decides we earned it. His family? Father Isaac asked, not as a demand but as a way to build the correct size of box around the moment. Burn, Eulalie said, and heard the way the word refused to be plural. She wobbled on that grammar and kept standing. Father Isaac looked past Eulalie to the maroon boatman in the doorway. He took the measure of a man who had made peace with laws different than the ones a priest keeps. He nodded, a salute that didn't try to be friendship. He crouched to Lex's height. Alexander, he said, do you like stories? Lex looked up into the priest's face as if up was a weather he had just learned could be kind. He nodded. He clung briefly to Rue's fingers, then let them go. His mouth made a small, private promise to itself and Father Isaac opened his hand without hurrying and the boy took it. Two things, Eulalie said to the priest as he turned. If they ask, you found him on your steps with a note that had only a name. And if they threaten you, talk about the bishop until they remember they fear paperwork more than hell. I am fluent in paperwork, Father Isaac said gravely, and closed the sacristy door on a hinge that didn't squeal. Now, René said, and the word moved like a boat launched. Your sister. Bel Amber groaned in the warming breeze. Eulalie could feel the attic lattice across the yard like a bandage she needed to rip off correctly or not at all. She slipped between pump and smokehouse the way a letter slides where you push it to disappear. Tantylorine ghosted at her shoulder now, though Eulalie had not heard her leave the island. Some women can always be where the choice is being made. Inside what was left of the house, air had turned to the opposite of song. Men had already hauled out bodies, two ladies in stiff lace, a boy whose lips were blue from smoke, a man Eulalie's hands had served breakfast to yesterday and would never serve again. She did not count them. Arithmetic tonight was a different discipline. The back stairs had held. She took them by instinct and not memory because memory can slow you down with all the times it has asked you to be patient. On the landing, heat painted her skin and clumsy hands. She blinked into the corridor that had been Madame's museum of old dresses and new lies. The wardrobe room's door had gone. The nursery suffocated without the beam that had learned to talk. The attic hatch hung open, black and coughing. Celandine, Eulalie said, because a mother's mouth keeps track of the first child's breath even when the air is trying to cook it. Stay at the stairs. If the floor says a word you don't like, you call me a sinner and I will come back. Celandine bared her teeth in something that wanted to be a smile and failed. Sinner, she said immediately. So it doesn't cost more later. Eulalie climbed. The attic was a long. She moved within it as if she were inside a beast's chest, timing steps to the breath the house could still manage. The lattice sat in its window frame like a prayer hammered wrong and never corrected. It was hot enough to brand. Eulalie wrapped her skirt over her hands and put her weight into the bottom prongs. They gave a fraction and then remembered their job and stopped. Tantai, Eulalie said without looking, and a pry bar slid into her palm as if she had reached into a drawer she had known since she was a girl. She planted the metal and leaned. Somewhere, a beam complained, somewhere else, a god made of mathematics shrugged. A cough came from the far eve. Not polite. Not one of those coughs a lady uses to announce an entrance to a drawing room full of men who want to pretend they didn't see her. A cough the body makes when it finally refuses to be lied to about what it needs. Zephine, Eulalie said, and the cough hiccuped, became a sound that used to be a laugh. Eula? Zephine's voice was smaller now, but real. I thought I invented you. I thought I invented fire so I would have a reason to be hotter than this room. Eulalie worked the lattice free one prong at a time. She found the screws that held it had been set from the outside. No good. Then she remembered the copper pan she had set under the chandelier, how it had caught and turned and kissed flame without spitting. A house is a thing with a grammar, she had learned the prepositions. Under, through, beyond. She turned the pry bar sideways and attacked the wood of the sash instead. It split like bread, reluctant but not stubborn. Tantai put a shoulder into it. Celandine grabbed the broken rail and pulled. The opening yawned a hand's width, 3 hands, a shoulder. Smoke bucked past them like a creature set free. Zephine crawled through as if she had taught herself to be a smaller person without losing herself. She fell into Eulalie with a weight that preached. Eulalie's mind did not record the words her mouth made. It recorded the precise shape of her sister's shoulder under her palm, the slope different than it had been at 17 but truer. Can you walk? Tantai asked, already pointing their bodies toward the stairs with a forearm that knew how to herd the living. Zephine nodded and then shook her head because both were true. Eulalie slung Zephine's arm over her own shoulders and took more of the weight without making a ceremony. They moved. Smoke tried to teach them the wrong dance. They refused to learn. At the foot of the attic steps, the house coughed a beam downward in the middle distance and men shouted warnings that came too late to be anything but loud. Eulalie felt the floor speak under her feet and didn't like its grammar. Quick now, she said, but the house made this the moment to shrug and fold. The corridor slanted. The stair turned mean. Celandine shoved her mother and aunt hard toward the run of steps that still remembered what they were for. Something moved in the corner of Eulalie's eye. Not flame. Not falling wood. A man's shape, thin as a cane stalk and twice as wiry. Gorse. He had come in from the front. He had found the back hall. He had put his foot on the very step that separated Eulalie from the door she could already taste. His rope hung from his hand like a plan that had been practicing itself for a lifetime. His mouth grinned because grins are cheap and men like him carry a lot of small money. Well now, he said, breath hardly hitching as if the air here recognized him. Look at the fish the fire spit back. Eulalie did not think. Thinking is a dessert you eat when you can. She shifted Zephine's weight and stepped into Gorse as if he were an insult she had needed to answer for 14 years. Her shoulder met his ribs. He wheezed. The rope flew from his hand as if it had been told to. Celandine had already marked where it would land. She threw her foot into it, heel grinding until the loop forgot how to be a circle. Gorse thrust a hand toward her face. Mab appeared at his side. Where did she come from, clever girl, and shoved a hot cinder into the cup of his palm. He screamed. The house gratefully swallowed the sound. Run, Tantai said, and this time the word meant what it usually does. They ran. Down the servants' stairs that knew their feet. Through the pantry that still remembered where Eulalie had hidden sweetness for her daughters. Past the table where she had once laid knives and thought only of onions. Out into air that had learned how to be air again. Gorse came after them anyway because some men will follow you into water even after you teach them they can't breathe there. He hit the yard and kept coming, and the rope in his smarting hands snaked even as his skin blistered. He would have caught them if God had not finally remembered arithmetic. From the left, a dog leapt, a big, red, perfect animal bred for tracking and punishment. It flew at Eulalie's back and would have taken a piece if the world had not changed last night. Instead, it made a noise like surprise and spun midair and hit the mud with its paws, trying to outrun themselves. Renee's boys shrieked laughter from the hedgerow. The dog shook its head and then ran in a circle that belonged to no logic Earth had ever signed for. It chased something that wasn't there until its body remembered thirst and sense, and it staggered toward the trough and put its whole face in. Another dog lunged and learned the same new story. Wire and cinnamon oil and something else the boys had borrowed from the sugar house had told their noses lies. The pack of animals who would have hunted women learned how to hunt their own confusion instead. Gorse cursed God in all the languages fear teaches. He threw the rope with a left hand that bled, and it fell short because left hands need practice too. He reached for a pistol and found he had taken it off when he went into the smoke because men like him are not as good at thinking as they are at hurting. Eulalie, Zephine, the girls, and Tantai ran along the washyard and across the ashes of 100 Mondays. Eulalie wanted to vomit only once, when she saw, at the edge of the kitchen, the little place where she had sat yesterday to rest her spine for 8 minutes between roasting and stewing. She did not. She kept the soup Tantai had given her inside because it had work yet to do. At the fence, the slat celandine had loosened months ago for practice finally became what it had been destined to be, a gate. They slid through. Renee's boat waited in the shallow cut with one boy at the oar and one hand on the mud. They tumbled in and the river took them exactly as hard as they needed to be taken. Gorse launched himself like a prayer said wrong. He cleared the fence and tried to clear the ditch and discovered that ambition can get a man as wet as it can get him rich. He fell shoulder deep in mud that had been waiting since the last flood to learn his name. Renee's boy put his paddle blade gently to the crown of Gorse's hat and pushed him back into the ditch when he tried to rise with clean fury. "Shoo," the boy said, sweetly. "You'll wake the rest of your pride." They did not laugh until the boat was under the lip of the levee and the house was a memory turning to soot in the daylight. Then Rue wheezed, once, twice, and the laugh that came out of her turned Mab into a river of tears, and Eulalie into a noise that wasn't laughing but would be later, and Celandine into a grin that looked like a wound learning to be a mouth. Zephine leaned on Eulalie and coughed black into a rag Tantai handed her. When she could breathe without feeling the world riding her lungs like a bad mule, she put her forehead against Eulalie's temple. "You got taller," she murmured, almost angry about it. "How dare you do that where I couldn't see? Where did you go?" Eulalie asked, and the question was so huge the boat dipped under it. "Nowhere," Zephine said. "Everywhere in this house. Madam kept me up there to sew the hems of the new dresses she needed to feel young. She made a clever little wing out of the attic and called it the treasure room." Zephine spat gently into the river. "I was the treasure. When she had callers, I was a secret that made her skin feel like gold." Eulalie closed her eyes, every muscle in her body learning a new definition for the word murder. She opened them again before the definition could ask her to pay for it. "You are not a secret," she said. "You are my sister." They reached St. Malo again, the island already knowing who had been added to the tribe of the breathing. Father Isaac did what he had promised and sent Lex away with Marcel and a basket of bread that would hide a child if you placed it in the right doorway and knocked the right rhythm. "You didn't ask where he belongs," Mab said, not accusing. "You just sent him." "Some mouths are not good at saying the word belong," Eulalie said. "So you put them in front of better teachers." Tantai set Zephine near the smallest fire and doctored her breath with leaves that had learned to argue with phlegm and wind. She looked at Eulalie over the steam. There will be a reckoning, she said. The house burned but the ledger survives. Not the book they keep numbers in. The one they hold in their heads about who owes them how many bows. Eulalie nodded. Then we will cook the arithmetic until it tastes like something else. She turned to her daughters. Listen, we do not crawl away like thieves. We walk like women who paid their bill at last. But we do not get sloppy with our shoes. Renee snorted, pleased with her mouth. There's a boat to take you north through the bayous, he said. It turns into a wagon when it reaches the edge of what a boat can claim. It belongs to Monsieur Dupré, who sells cypress planks to people who pretend their porches hold up the sky. He owes me for a favor involving a sheriff and a cousin's temper. His driver will carry 3 girls and 2 women to a place where papers mean less than a story told in the right kitchen. And after that? Celandine asked. She was already past the river in the wagon, in a town where she would be asked for water and be allowed to say no. After that, Eulalie said, a woman named Alouette in the city with the big clock takes in girls who can sew and cook and climb stairs without telling them how their voices should sound when men listen. She looked at Zéphine. And any sister who needs a bed for 6 months while her lungs learn the new trick of drawing air without orders. Zéphine smiled a ghost smile that had begun to remember cheeks. I will sew until the thread looks like a path, she said. They did not leave that morning. St. Malo had a custom of letting the swamp listen for 1 more hour than your fear thought you needed. They slept again and woke to a day that did not smell like smoke except where skin keeps secrets. When they pushed the skiff out, the island gave them no blessing, which was its blessing. Blessings are loud. Quiet is what you carry. They moved by a map that existed only in men's shoulders and women's wrists. Renee handed them to Dupré's driver as if he were giving someone a pot that had been tempered correctly. The driver tipped his hat to Tantai Lorraine and did not check under the tarps because men who live long learn to trust women who make islands in the swamp. The wagon rode slow. Cypress swamp wandered into cane field wandered into broken pasture where cows who had never been named chewed as if chewing could save them. The road turned into a better road and then into a road that claimed to be a street. Houses pretended that paint made them kind. The big clock towered like a woman with her hands on her hips who had outlived 7 husbands and all of her patients. Alouette's door looked like any door. The woman who opened it did not. She had hair the color of last year's pecans and eyes that stopped men without their knowing why. I was cooking, she said, wiping her hands on an apron that had never boiled a lie. Come in or the neighbors will name this moment wrong. Inside, the air smelled like onion and thyme and the shadow of a laugh. There were beds upstairs with quilts that would not be ashamed to lie on any judge's parlor floor. There was a table with scratches that told stories about elbows and spills and peace. Eulalie had never cried in front of a stranger's wood before. She did now, briefly, and the wood bore it without swelling. Girls, Alouette said, the way a general says soldiers when he means people I will not waste. You can stay 2 weeks to learn the way the stairs do and not do. You can stay 6 months to learn what the city asks and how to make it ask for less. You can stay a year to sew your names into a hem that men will think they own. After that, you will choose. But for all the nights between now and then, you will sleep lying down. Celandine, proud as a pronoun, nodded once. Mab nodded 3 times quick, as if agreeing with a rhythm. Rue wove her fingers into Zéphine's, then into Eulalie's, then into Alouette's, daring the world to untangle them. In the days that followed, the city did what cities do, tried to make new mouths out of old names. Mab apprenticed herself to the stove with Alouette's blessing and learned how a kitchen door can be a gate or a wall depending on who holds its hinge. Celandine took a needle and found it was a blade if you looked crooked at it, and a key if you didn't. Rue carried baskets as if carrying could be art. Zéphine slept, coughed, slept, and woke a little less haunted each afternoon. In the evenings, Eulalie sat by the window and watched the street refuse to be quiet. She thought of Father Isaac and whether the bishop had learned to fear paperwork again. She thought of Lex and whether he had found a hand that braided his hair without making him wince. She thought of Gorse and whether the ditch had finally given back his hat. On the 7th evening, a letter came. Not from a white man. Not from a priest. From Tanti Lorraine, carried by a boy whose feet had learned the city like a clever dog learns alleys. The paper was brown and smelled like bay leaves. The script was sturdy, like bread. Cook. The swamp says. The county raged but the water yawned. Gorse cut the ferry rope and the ferry carried 2 men too far. One learned to swim the long way, the other learned to pray short. The dogs will not eat cinnamon again without sneezing. This is funny and useful. The ledger at Belle Amber, both books, burned. Whether you meant it or not, you set free more than a roof. It will take them years to rebuild the part of themselves that tells them who they own. As for the white child, he was received by the sister of the woman who ran from Mobile years back and married someone who liked boats more than he liked being given orders. The boy will keep his eyes and his name. The priest is as good at paperwork as you said. He made 3 copies of the truth and none of the lie. If you need to move again, send a cake with too much nutmeg to Alouette's house and we will come at night and make the road shorter. L. Eulalie folded the letter along the creases it offered and slid it into the seam of the window where the wood would keep it until she needed its weight again. She breathed once, twice, like a woman who has stopped cooking other people's hunger and started learning her own. On the 10th day, Zéphine woke without coughing. I dreamed of the river, she said, and the way she said it made the room pay attention. But it was not glass. It was bread. We tore pieces off and handed them down a line that had no end, and everyone had enough, and still the loaf sat there, whole. Eulalie laughed then, a sound like water agreeing to be river, and the girls laughed because laughter is a door you're allowed to run through barefoot if your mother holds it. Alouette laughed from the stove and did not burn the roux. News traveled like mold in a pantry, everything learned it and some things tried to pretend they hadn't. Belle Amber had become a cautionary story men told on porches. Don't line your house with silk, it burns too good. Women told another story in laundries. Don't teach your cook heat and then pretend she can't speak its language. Neither story said the names of Eulalie or her daughters. The right people knew them. The wrong people didn't. That is a kind of victory that doesn't throw a parade. A month from the night the house burned, a man with a hat too clean knocked on Alouette's door. He had papers. He had a deputy with him who tried to look bored. We're looking for 3 young women, the man said, cheerful the way a man is when he thinks he's about to be thanked for tidying up the world. Names not known for certain. Colored. One tall with an expression problem, one with too much mind in her hands, one with a mouth that will get her in trouble. Alouette pursed her lips as if she had tasted something that had spent too much time near the cumin. I have women coming and going, she said. Many of them tall. All of them minds and mouths. If you find one with neither, I will keep her on a shelf and dust her. The deputy snorted into his palm and then coughed to apologize to his superior. The man with the hat tapped his papers as though they had begged to be noticed. There is also a cook. Eulalie. Notorious. He said it like he was describing a disease and an opera singer at the same time. Alouette widened her eyes by a millimeter. Notorious cooks are called chefs, she said politely. We prefer ours humble and hot. The man leaned to look past her shoulder. Eulalie sat at the table with a bowl of peas and a pot in one hand and a smile that might have been invented that morning. Celandine sat with a thimble, unafraid. Mab had flour on her palms, Rue had a book open like a door on her lap. Zéphine was upstairs awake and listening at the top step the way women who have returned from the dead like to do when the living pretend to announce them. Evening, Eulalie said, and didn't make her mouth small. Evening, the man returned, puzzled by the absence of heat in her kitchen and the abundance of it in her eyes. Have you seen a cook named Eulalie? Eulalie considered the question the way a woman considers a recipe that would cost too much and feed the wrong hunger. Every morning in the glass, she said at last. I don't think she's home to callers. The deputy coughed again, less successfully hiding a smile this time. The man with the hat straightened his papers the way people straighten smaller things when they cannot straighten the truth. If you hear of her, he said, tell her the law has questions. The law always does, Alouette said, and closed the door with a soft firm kindness that felt like a well-made bed. After they left, no one talked for a while. Then Rue shut her book because you can only read a sentence so many times before you learn how it ends if you don't turn the page. "We'll have to leave," she said softly, not afraid, just aware that houses don't get to keep women who the county has started to say by name like a prayer or a curse. "Not tonight," Eulalie said. "Tonight we cook, we eat, we lay down. Tomorrow we will stand where the road parts and ask which direction costs us less of ourselves." She put her palms on the table and the wood did not mind that they were not humble. "Will there be more fire?" Mab asked, a strange hope in the question, not for burning but for agency. Eulalie considered the pot, the stove, the window where the city sipped evening. "There will be heat where we tell it to live," she said. "And cold where we say not tonight." She looked at each daughter, at her sister, at the room that had learned their breathing. "I will not take you into every fight this world wants to introduce you to. But I will not teach you to bow to any more introductions you didn't ask for." They ate. They slept. In the morning, Alouette laid out 3 dresses that would pass in a different parish and a basket of bread big enough to hide another small truth if it needed hiding. Renee's boy knocked with a code that sounded like someone pretending to be a woodpecker for the joy of it. The road north unrolled like a bolt of muslin someone had kept clean for this exact dress. Before they left, Eulalie went to the big clock and looked up. Time towered. It ticked in a pompous way, as clocks do when they have not learned the smell of kitchens. She put her palm flat against the stone and whispered, "Be kinder to my girls than you were to me, and I will not quarrel with how loud you talk." The clock said nothing, which is the only sentence a timepiece can make that isn't a lie. They stepped into the wagon like women walking onto a stage without wanting applause. The city opened to let them through, annoyed and admiring. Fields took their wheels. The swamp sent up herons to testify that some part of the world knows how to keep its beauties where men can't steal them. Somewhere far behind, a man with a rope nursed a palm and told a story that made him the hero, and a county nodded because counties are hungry for that diet. Somewhere nearer, a priest taught a boy how to knead bread without making it tough and how to pray without making it stupid. Somewhere ahead, a house with quilts waited for hands that would change the way it kept its own heat. Eulalie sat with her daughters and her sister and watched the road decline to make decisions for them. She put one hand on the edge of the wagon and the other on the basket with too much nutmeg. She knew the code now, the way the swamp women talked when they wanted to say yes without inviting a witness. She felt the arithmetic of the world change its column one more faint place, the way flour changes when you sift it once more than the recipe asks. "Before we are done," she said, voice even, eyes on the cracked line of the horizon, "we will buy a door that opens inward. We will stand behind it when men knock and decide if their names are food or weather. We will not be secrets. We will be rooms." Rue stuck her head under Eulalie's arm and made a sound like a kitten promising to grow claws. Mab smiled into the wind where it would cut the smile into something harder. Celandine kept her eyes on the road because someone had to look where the wheels were pretending to be brave. Zéphine closed her eyes and slept, and Eulalie counted the breaths, 1, 2, 3, because some tallies you keep forever. They rolled north until the sun learned a new address. When the first farmhouse came into view with a porch that needed shoring and a woman on it who looked like she'd been born making do, Eulalie felt the future discover them and nod as if to say, "I can work with what you brought me." She lifted the basket. The nutmeg inside leaned against its fellows and made the air honest. Eulalie smiled at the smell, at her daughters, at the world that wanted to make the same mistake again and again, and at the new arithmetic she had decided would pay their way. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.